hello everyone, I am Sushma. I'll be taking over from here and we'll be discussing in detail on what is a medical device, how can we classify, and how to register various applications with CDSCO in India. So to start with, we will start with the definition of medical device. We just understood from in the earlier slide that all the medical devices, whatever classification it might be, if they falls under the definition of a medical device, they have to be registered in India in order to sell in the Indian market. So, how do we understand whether the product is a medical device or not? So the CDSCO has given the definition for a medical device. So the device that can be an instrument, apparatus, appliance, implant, material, or other article, which can be used either alone or in combination with any other accessory, or it can be a software as well. This device should be used specifically for human beings or for animals as well. So in case you have a medical device which is not used in human beings but used in animals, it will be referred as a medical device in India, and it would fall under the purview of the CDSCO. So you would need a registration to sell in Indian market. So and this the device should not achieve the primary intended action in the human body or on the animals, and should not show any pharmacological or immunological or metabolic means in the human body. Which means if the device is showing any primary intended action in any of the pharmacological way, it will be considered as a drug. So, in by this definition, we understand that the device should not be providing any primary intended action. It should have a secondary impact of special purposes, like it should be used for diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, treatment, or evaluation of assistance, supporting or life sustaining. It can also be used as a disinfectant of medical devices, and it can also be used as control for contraception. So these are few of the factors that are used in identifying a medical device. So if you are wondering, you have a device, whether that product falls under a medical device category or maybe an electronic device or maybe under a drug. If you are having any such borderline device, you can surely contact A3 to get in touch with us to understand the device. Otherwise, CDSU has provided these medical device rules for us to understand in detail. So let's look into the now that now that we understand what a medical device is, let's look into the classification and grouping of the medical device. So coming to classification, the medical devices are classified based on their risk level. So how much risk they are causing in the human body. Based on the risk level, they are classified into class A, B, C, and D. So the CDSCO has also provided a predetermined medical device risk classification for various classes. Like for example, if you have a device which falls under orthopedic or an ophthalmist, there is a certain list of already approved devices in India. You can go refer to the classification list provided by CDSCO to confirm your classification of the device, or also verify the medical device rules to confirm the classification. Um, so the other factors that are used to confirm the classification of the device are four factors that are identified. The first one is the intended use of the device, the duration of the device, the invasiveness of the device, and the mode of operation. Based on these four factors, the risk classification will be varied for the device. So here we have put up some examples for your easy understanding. So for class A, which this is considered as the lowest risk classification, and absorbent cotton wools and alcohol swabs fall under this category. And for class B, it is considered as low moderate risk, and devices like thermometer, disinfectants fall under this category. For class C, it is considered as moderate high risk. So few implants and catheters falls under this category. And for class D, it is the highest risk classification. So angiographic guide wires and a few cardiac catheters or renal catheters fall under this category. So here are a few examples for medical devices depending on their classification. We have put up some more examples to understand the IVDs as well, since IVDs also fall under the medical device category in India so far. So for class A low risk, the example can be a refractometer, blood cell counter, etc. For class B low moderate risk, co-oximetry analyzer, nitric oxide breath analyzer can be good examples. For class C moderate high risk, cancer risk assessment interpurview device. And for class D, RHD blood grouping analyzer for near patient testing is a good example for the high risk device. So these are few examples for the classification of in India for both medical devices and in vitro diagnostics. So by following the classification list provided by CDSCO and the classification medical device rules for the devices, you should be able to classify your device based on these risk levels. Even after that, if you are still uncertain whether your product is falls under a low risk or a low moderate risk or moderate high risk, or if you have a very different category, if you have a device which is have which has a different risk class in any of the DHDF countries than compared to India. And if you're not certain how to classify your device in India, you can certainly reach out to HC to assist you in the classification. So moving on to the grouping. So not only classification of a medical device, grouping of medical devices is also important in order to decide on the number of applications that you put to the CDSCO. So depending on the group types that we're going to discuss now, you can reduce the number of applications or you can increase the number of applications depending on the rules provided for grouping. So grouping is done mostly depending on the risk classes, their common intended use, their methodology, design, manufacturing process, and if the components are compatible to each other to be used as a kit or not, or whether they are used in combination with each other or not to serve a single purpose, or whether they're compatible to use as a system, or if it has multiple components, how they are supplied, to import into India, whether they can be put together to work as a common group or a system. So depending on these factors, the grouping will be, done for the medical devices. So the specific of like you if you have a device which has more than one component, then the grouping of the medical devices will be done based on five factors. So here we have put on the factors for your easy understanding. The first one would be the material of construction of the component. So if your components have different material of construction, so for example, let us consider the product has sorry, the component has a material of chromium, and an orthopedic another component has a titanium. So even though both can be tibial components or femoral components, both can be same components, might have same design as well. But if the material of construction varies, then the product will be considered as a different, and separate fees has to be paid for that component. So it is important to understand the material of construction, the design as well, and how they will be packed and sold in India. So whether they are individually imported into India as single components and later combined, put together, used as a system, or whether they are imported into India as a system. Based on that, the number of applications varies while you group the devices. Also, intended use and shelf life of the devices are also verified in order to group the devices in while you file the application. So these are few of the factors that you'll need to verify while you file the application to CDSCO, and accordingly, the additional fees has to be paid to CDSCO based on the grouping. So now that we know how a grouping is done, let us understand what are the types of groups that exist in order to file an application. So the first grouping category is a single. So for single, it has to be sold a distinct package entity. It has to be a single device, and it will not meet any of the other grouping criteria. So then we call it as a single category group. And for the next group, it is a group where collection of two or more medical devices are put together, which are from different manufacturers, but of course sold under a single proprietary group name. They will be supplied in a single package, and will have a common intended use. So we can group these two or more devices under the category of group. If you have devices which are of same risk class, have a common intended use, same design and manufacturing process, and if they have variations that are within the scope of the permissible variants that are provided by CDSCO, you can group those different products under the category of family. And then if you have medical devices which are intended to be used in combination to complete a specific intended purpose, and if they are compatible when used as a system and are sold under a single proprietary name, you can group it under the category system. So these are four groups provided as per the grouping guidelines for medical devices. Let us understand how the fees will be paid for each of the grouping category and how the documentation will be submitted to CDSCO. For a single grouping category, the fees has to be paid individually for each single device, and a separate documentation will be prepared for each single device. For a group, a single fees will be paid for the whole group, or the two or more devices that are put together in the group. A single fees will be paid for the group. However, you will need to prepare the documentation separately for each of the medical devices. In the category for family, again a single fee will be paid, and a common documentation or the device master file can be prepared for the devices altogether. When coming to the category of system, here we have again two categories on how they are packed and shipped into India. So if the product is a system and imported as a single unit pack, okay, so we can pay a single fee for the whole system, which includes two or more devices, but you'll have to prepare the documentation individually for each of the components in the system. If the system is imported as a single unit, also at a later stage, individual components will be imported depending on the requirement provided by the health physician. Then a separate fees for each of the components has to be paid, and also separate documentation for each of the component has to be submitted to CDSCO in order to submit the applications. So these are few of the grouping guidelines that you need to follow for medical devices. So coming to grouping of in vitro diagnostics, again a single category where you have a single distinct package entity is grouped, and which does not fall into any of the other in vitro diagnostic categories will be put here. The other category is the family, which is similar to what we discussed in medical devices. It should have the same risk class, common intended use, design, manufacturing clauses, and should have variations that are within the scope of the permissible variants. For this new group, which is applicable only for the in vitro diagnostics, we call this group as IVD cluster. Here, if the devices have common methodology but may have different intended uses, but are also sold under a single proprietary name, they can be put together, and they should be compatible when used as a test kit. So those devices can be put under IVD cluster. For IVD test kit, the intended use must be the intended use of the devices is that they have to be used together in combination to complete the specific intended purpose. The reagents or the articles compatible with the IVD kits can be put together. And this test kit has to be sold under a single proprietary name. So this is the IVD test kit for in vitro diagnostic device. So the other category is for the system, again, which is similar to medical devices. If the device is intended to be used in combination to complete a specific intended purpose and is compatible when used as a system, then we call it as a system, and those devices can be grouped under the system category. So let us understand how the fees and the documentation will be submitted for these categories. For single, again, as we discussed, separate documentation and separate fees will be submitted. For family, you can, since you're putting all of them together, so a common fees for all the devices together, a single fee will be paid, and a common device master file will be submitted for all the devices. For IVD cluster, you will have to pay separate fees for each of the devices that are put together, and however, a common device master file can be prepared for the device. For IVD, again, depending on how they are imported into India, these test kits are categorized as into IVD test kits that are imported as a single unit, and IVD test kits that are imported as both single unit as and also as individual components. So for Excuse. For single units, the fees will be separate for each of the test kit. Um, uh, and the documentation has to be provided for the test kit altogether. So now for the IVD test kit to be imported as a single unit and also for individual components, the separate fees has to be paid for each of the components in the IVD test kit, and also a separate documentation has to be prepared for each of the individual components. So again, we have two categories here for the system as well. So for system that is imported as a single unit, both the fees can be paid one for the whole unit, of course, but the documentation for each of the device will be separate for each component. Uh, for the system that is imported as a single unit and also as an individual component, separate fees and also separate documentation for each of the component will be prepared. So these are few of the grouping guidelines for in vitro diagnostic devices. So now that we have understood